Ilana was in a strange land called Syria, far from her house and country. She worked for Captain Naaman and his wife. She helped around the house with all sorts of tasks. She would buy food from the market, help to prepare the food, do the dishes, and take messages to the neighbors. She was a clever and helpful young girl who could do many tasks. Anything Mrs. Naaman would ask her to do, she did. There was, however, one thing that young Ilana did not do. She did not bow down to the idol Captain Naaman and his wife bowed to. This idol was made of wood and stone and could not hear or see. Whenever Captain Naaman and his wife bowed down to pray to their idol, they would invite Ilana to join them. Ilana refused the invitation. She would always tell them that she can only pray to the one true God in heaven, and he can hear her and see her. One morning, after Ilana did all her house chores, she went to look where Mrs. Naaman was, as she did not come to eat her breakfast. Ilana took Mrs. Naaman's food to her room. When she entered the room, she saw Mrs. Naaman crying. Ilana asked her why she was so sad and why she was crying. Mrs. Naaman replied that she was very sad because her husband, Captain Naaman, is very sick. He had leprosy. What made Mrs. Naaman even sadder was that there was no one that could help her husband. All the doctors tried to heal him, but they could not heal her husband. Ilana remembered that there was a wise prophet in her country, Israel, where she came from, who could heal people. She told Mrs. Naaman about the prophet. Ilana told her that this prophet from her country would know how to heal Captain Naaman, and that she is sure that he could help him if he is willing to travel that far. Mrs. Naaman ran to her husband with the good news that Ilana told her. Captain Naaman thought about it, and he decided that he would go to this prophet. He told his servants to get his best horse and chariot and took presents and money to the prophet. His servants also went on their own horses with Captain Naaman. As they were riding down the road, Mrs. Naaman and Ilana waved them goodbye. The prophet Elisha saw Captain Naaman and his men coming from afar. He knew of Captain Naaman's leprosy. So he sent his servant Gehazi to meet him along the way and to tell him to go and bathe himself 7 times in the Jordan River. Then he will be healed. Gehazi met the captain and his men along the way and gave the message as the prophet Elisha told him. Captain Naaman became very angry at the prophet when he heard the instructions from the servant. He thought that the prophet would call the name of his God, wave his hand over him, and he would be cured. He asked his men if this prophet thought he was dirty. Did the prophet think that there are no good rivers in his country, Syria, where he can take a bath? Captain Naaman said that he is not going to take a bath in a muddy river in Israel. He wanted to go home. He turned his chariot around and started to go on the road to his home country. But the men that came with him spoke to him and said that what the prophet asked was something small, and that Captain Naaman should do this small request. Captain Naaman thought of Ilana's strong faith in her only God. So he decided to do the small thing that the prophet told him to do, and turned his horses and chariot toward the Jordan River. He walked into the river and sank down under the water. He came up and looked at his arms, and the leprosy was still there. Again he sank down under the water and came up. The leprosy was still on his body. He looked at his men standing on the side of the river. They looked very worried. Again and again He sank down until he counted 7 times he went down under the water. As he came up after the 7th time, he looked at his skin, and the leprosy was gone. He was so delighted that he shouted with joy. He went to the prophet to thank him and told him that now he knows that there is only one true God, the God of Israel that healed him. Captain Naaman offered presents and money to the prophet to thank him, but the prophet did not take it. Captain Naaman asked the prophet to let him take ground from the earth of Israel with him to his own country. Then he would go down on his knees on that ground to pray to the only God of Israel, to thank him for his health. Captain Naaman rushed home to his wife and Ilana to show them that the God of Israel healed him. He told them that he will not be bowing down to the idols made of wood and stone that cannot hear or see him, that from that day on he and his family will only pray and bow down to the God of Israel. Captain Naaman and his wife were very thankful that Ilana told them about the prophet of Israel, and that she set an example to never bow down to their idols. Ilana was very happy to see that Captain Naaman was healed, and she prayed with him and his wife to the only God of Israel. Children, we hear from this story that helping people can change their lives for the better. Like Ilana, you do not have to be a very important person, rich, or a very learned person to tell them about and point them to Yahweh and make a change in their lives. After Captain Naaman listened to Ilana's advice, he went to be healed, and he only bowed down to the true God of Israel. This made his whole family happy because he was healed. Children, have a good day and a peaceful Shabbat, as the Shabbat will be coming around every week. Yom Tov v'Shabbat Shalom.